Okay. Now, when did you first become interested in doing research on the JFK assassination?
I was fascinated by and shocked by it when it happened. A week or so later, I was so upset by what was and was not happening that I sent a lead and summary of a magazine article to my agent in New York. Her reply was, it was almost hysterical, and incidentally it was correct, that nobody in New York was considering anything other than what the government was saying. That horrified me. And at that point, I decided that I would do with the Warren Report what I had done professionally in intelligence. I was an intelligence analyst in World War II, not a spook. And that's what I did. That's what my first book is. It's an analysis of the Warren Report. I did not intend to continue with this kind of work on the Kennedy assassination. The second book I planned had the title Tiger to Ride, with the subtitle The Untold Story of the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was to have been a book on the changes in Kennedy's policy that began with the Cuban Missile Crisis. But I continued researching that, but the doctrine of the books that followed mine upset me very much. The first two had axes to grind, and I just, not intending to, continued the work.
Okay.
Dave, before you go on, can I have you speak from this side? Is that
Sure,
possible?
sure.
Because the way I have him framed, I don't want him looking that direction.
Okay, that's good. No, this is more comfortable for me anyway. Now, what do you consider your area of specialization or the focus of your research?
The way the government malfunctioned. I do the only really factual work on the Kennedy assassination, but it is in terms of the official investigations, and there was more than Warren commissions. And the thrust of all of my work, that most people don't perceive, but many do, is that in that time of great crisis, and ever since then, all the institutions of our society have failed, and that represents a great danger to our society and the form of our society. I'm a firm believer in the democratic system and representative society. In spite of all of its many failings, I think it is still the best system of freedom through self-government that man has yet devised. And I think that the greatest political thinkers of all time were those we know as our founding fathers. It is in this sense that I have done this work.
At this late date, is there anything that can be done to actually clarify the circumstances of the assassination so that Americans can have a clearer picture for historical truth of the case?
In order to address that in a different way, I finished a book that is now being prepared for publication. I don't know anything about when it will appear. It's called Never Again. It's an overview of the whole thing, with a lot of new evidence that I obtained through all of these many Freedom of Information lawsuits I filed. I've gotten 1/3 pages that way. And it documents the government intent never to investigate the crime itself, and that it was never investigated. So there are no leads to be followed. But I think it is important for the people to know that their government malfunctioned, how it did, why it did. And I think it's important for at some point government to recognize that and be honest with the people. If that day ever comes, it will do more to restore the missing faith in government than anything I can think of. And that is my hope.
Well, it looks like you've answered my second question also, because I was going to ask you, why is this case still so burningly important 3 decades after it's occurred?
Well, there's an additional reason why it's so burningly important. It is that the people are troubled by it. I hear from a lot of young people who tell me they were not born at the time Kennedy died, and they express their love for the man, and they're uneasy about the whole thing. I hear from many of those who say I was 8, 10 years old, as well as many who were older, who are mature citizens. And the one thing, and it crosses all political lines, is unease and dissatisfaction and worry.
Do you see evidence, I know that you mostly document the government incompetence about investigating the case, but do you see any evidence, in your opinion, that indicates that there was a conspiracy to kill the president?
It's without question, and I've already published it redundantly. In simple form, if the crime was beyond the capability of any one man, then on that basis alone there was a conspiracy. And I've proved many ways, and I want to emphasize that I've done this only by the official evidence itself, that nobody was able to duplicate the shooting attributed to Oswald. And no matter what kind of cockamamie stories you have, like the current one from Gerald Posner, it is a fact. Nobody was able to duplicate the shooting attributed to Oswald. And I'm talking about the best shots the government could get.
Now, there's, after the uproar of the Stone film, regardless of what you might think of the thesis in the Stone film, they at least had made some sort of an effort to unlock the files. And I see that some of them are still withheld. Which of the still secret files would you most like to see?
I have no idea which they are, but I would say that they would be on or about Oswald and on or about any efforts that were made that we do not know about to try and solve the crime. I want to add something there to what you said, because I am responsible for what became a campaign against Stone. My only opposition to what Oliver Stone did was to lie to the people and telling them that his work would be of nonfiction when it was clearly a work of fiction. Other than that, he's got a right to say anything he wants to say.
Mm-hmm.
Dave,
What?
you've cut out.
Testing. 1, 2. No, it's too up, too high. Okay. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Still not contacting properly. Testing. 1, 2. There it is. That's good. Okay. Don't touch it now. Okay. Now I know that you don't theorize yourself and aren't real tolerant of other people that theorize. But who are some of the other...
Excuse me, that's only if they go public and tell the people that this is a solution. They have every right to theorize in their own minds.
So you're not really against the speculation as long as they don't announce that this is...
As long as they don't deceive the people with it.
Right. Now, what I'm getting to there is, who are some of the other researchers that you know that you've been associated with who've contributed to our understanding of the case? Who've been the good researchers?
I would say that the two best books that are not available were by Sylvia Marr, Accessories After the Fact, and by Howard Rothman, Presumed Guilty. Sylvia's is a brilliant work. Howard's is perhaps the best simplification. Of those who are still working in the field, I haven't had as much contact with them in recent years, but I've got a lot of respect for much of the work Paul Hoke has done. He's in Berkeley, California. Without Jim Lassar, we would never know what we know today. He handled all of my Freedom of Information lawsuits. And they are responsible, really, for the opening of the files. Most people don't know it, but Congress amended the Freedom of Information Act's investigatory files exemption to open up FBI and CIA files, with Teddy Kennedy seeing to it that the legislative history would be clear. The need for it came from my first suit for the results of the scientific testing. So Jim has never been really given the credit he deserves for the work he did when I couldn't pay him. It was difficult, it was long-lasting. Some of those suits lasted more than 10 years. Can you imagine the government stonewalling suits for 10 years? Several of them. I think that of those whose work I'm familiar with, those are the best. There are others who haven't done as much work, and some of their work I agree with, some of it I don't. But they're not theorizing conspiracies.
Now, you and Jim Lazar had been struggling to get the spectrographic evidence of the tests on the bullet fragments. When that was finally released to George Michael Ivica, did you get a hold of that, or did it come to you at the same time?
What was released to him?
I believe some results of spectrographic analysis you were trying to get, and they released it to him instead.
He got nothing.
Got nothing.
He got nothing that exceeded part of what I got.
Mm-hmm.
And I doubt very much if he got enough for him to get an understanding of it. He never told me this, but what we established has never been reported by anybody but me, so I doubt if he got that. But the FBI never, ever put the results of his scientific testing together in comprehensible form. for the commission or for anyone else. When I asked for some of these things, rather than give them to me, they destroyed them. And then they come up with a cock and bull story that one of the spectrographic plates, we're talking about a thin piece of film, and they didn't say this under oath or first-person knowledge, so they couldn't be acted against for lying as perjury. But they said it was destroyed to save space. Can you imagine that? They destroyed. Do you have any idea how massive the FBI files are? First of all, it was against the law. Second of all, it was against the regulations. In addition to that, it was against the finding of the Attorney General that this was an historical case in which there should be maximum disclosure and no destruction. And the courts are such that they got away with it.
Now, there was also a story about the, speaking of destruction of files, I believe it was Army intelligence in the mid-'70s said that they destroyed their Oswald file because it was a routine thing. Do you know the story behind that?
No, that starts with me. And if it hadn't been for the fact that the man who responded was going to retire in 3 weeks, I doubt I would have learned the truth. He told me that all 3 files that the Army had were destroyed. He didn't just limit it to Oswald. He said they had nothing left. Now that too was a violation of law and regulations. Those kinds of files may not be destroyed without the written assent of the Archivist of the United States. He has the right, and he normally exercises it, to have those files sent to him. And he then decides whether or not they are suitable for destruction. This kind of thing, one misfeasance, malfeasance, and nonfeasance after another, characterizes everything the government did.
Do you think that there'll be any purpose served by having a new investigation, and if so, how should it be done?
This is a pipe dream. Who in the world do you think is going to, you were talking about somebody in an official position or a political person. Who in the world is going to openly fight with the FBI? Nobody is going to do it and hope to survive it, so there will never be a meaningful investigation unless it's by people who don't give a damn what dirty stuff the FBI pulls on them. The FBI is still cloned on J. Edgar Hoover.
Let's see. Have you ever been harassed or threatened or attacked in any way because of your research activities?
I've never been attacked physically, but yes, the other things, but they finally gave up on it, at least overtly. We've gotten all sorts of threatening telephone calls, some of them quite sophisticated. One time, somebody played me the soundtrack of Shane over the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I have voice prints of that, by the way. When I wasn't home and nobody knew I was not home, my wife would get calls, aren't you afraid something going to happen to your husband? All sorts of written and spoken personal attacks have been launched on me, not very often to my face. And you get used to these things. All sorts of attacks have been launched on my work. But again, none of it is factual.
Do you see any credence to the alleged suspicious or convenient deaths that have happened in relation to the case?
It's ridiculous. It was made up by Penn Jones, who was a well-intended man, but it had no substance then. And in the exaggerated form used by Jim Marrs, it's even more ridiculous. Marrs doesn't even know some of the things he writes about. There's several cases of that, but there's no point in wasting time on it. It's just ridiculous. There was no reason for any of these people to be killed. No one of them had to take anything to his grave.
Now, I've just heard that 4 of the 5 review board members of the JFK Records Act have finally been appointed by Clinton. Do you think that President Clinton should become more actively involved in trying to resolve the controversy for the sake of the American people?
I don't think that's a political possibility. And I don't think he's in a position to have people counsel him wisely and correctly. This has all been converted into a major media event which has the effect of continued suppression. These records, the latest estimate I saw of the volume is 1 million pages, are records that should have been disclosed years ago. I doubt if many of them are not included within my Freedom of Information requests or lawsuits, and they were just dishonest about it. But just stop and think about it. They say there's 1 million pages. Who in the world is going to be able to buy, store, and read 1 million pages? When you get an idea of the volume of my files, which are less than a third of that, you'll see the impossibility. You're talking about an expenditure of about $250,000 just for the paper, perhaps another $50,000 for the file cabinets. And I'm not talking about supplies like file folders. That also is another cost. You'll find very few people and very few corporations, even wealthy corporations, who will want to, who are either will want to or are able to engage in that kind of an expenditure. Just the rental of space for that kind of bulk is a major continuing cost to a corporation. So it all amounts to another successful effort to deceive, mislead, and hide from the people.
Now, this case has been described in one way as a hall of mirrors. How should historians or researchers approach and deal with the problem of misinformation and disinformation of the case?
I think the only approach is the one I've taken. Do all your work in terms of what is established fact. There are some things that are not established, some things that are partly established, but many and all the basic things, other than who did the killing, are beyond question. The failing of all these books of theorized conspiracies is that they don't even know what the proven fact is. There's no way of doing any responsible scholarship without knowing what you're talking about. And you're not going to know what you're talking about unless you master the available fact.
Okay, a couple more questions and then we're done. Because the case is so complex and has so many contradictory and confusing bits of evidence, researchers, at least the ones that I've come in contact with, complain that the average journalist is not informed enough, not up on the complexities of the case enough to ask educated questions. If you were to interview yourself, some people love this question, some people hate it. What's important about the case, or what's the killer question? What do you wish a journalist would ask you about this case?
I've never thought of that, but part of the responsibility that lies with those you call researchers. Most of them, although you have named them, I consider are not that. But I suppose the continuing question is who killed the president? The next question is why? The next question is what were the consequences? In other terms, what can a reporter write a story about? I would say, who did the covering up and why?
Okay, this is the final question. What do you feel personally is your most significant accomplishment or contribution to our body of knowledge on the JFK assassination?
It may seem immodest, but it's quite simple. Bringing to light virtually all that is factual about the crime. And the second part is staying away from these deceiving exploitations that are sometimes flattered by being called conspiracy theories.
Okay.
There's one thing I might add to what you asked me before. Mm-hmm. Years ago, the average newspaper editor was turned off when he got one of the endless releases from these conspiracy nuts and their organizations. Oh, more of that Kennedy assassination shit that went in the wastebasket. That is a continuing attitude, and it is justified. I regret to say that it is justified. All the media, by the way, don't misunderstand me, there's absolutely no excuse for the media's behavior. It abdicated all of its responsibilities. I'm not defending that. But I am explaining the attitudes. There is just no way, without something exceptional, for anything responsible on the subject to get any real attention at the major media because of all of this insanity over all of these years.
Okay, and when you bring up the media, I have a couple of interesting points maybe we can finish up on with that. In the church committee, there was a point in time where they determined that the CIA had what they call friendly assets or propaganda assets in the media, and the church committee apparently stopped short of identifying who they were. And the question relating to that is, do you feel that the media, in terms of the JFK assassination, was manipulated by the intelligence agencies?
I think that while that's true, I think it was not necessary. The media manipulated itself. It abdicated all of its responsibilities. It abdicated its critical judgment. It abdicated its normal standards of what is and is not news. And as a matter of fact, the church committee did not bring that to light. We had already brought that to light before it gave more attention to it.
Have those journalists ever been identified? Are their files sealed somewhere that we can't see?
Not that I know of.
Mhm.
That would be immune under the Freedom of Information and the Privacy Act.
Okay.
And I might add, much as we like to know it, protecting the rights of privacy of people is something we should never lose sight of. It's a need, especially when our government has engaged in so many abuses of so many people.
A lot of people don't understand that there's been four major investigations that have touched on the JFK assassination in the government: the Rockefeller Commission, the church committees, Schweiker area, and also the House Select Committee. Is there anything you'd like to add about those other investigations that would be relevant to your work?
I described them before they were created, and using the word whitewash as a title for the series of my first 4 books. There wasn't one of them that ever intended to get to the root of the crime. The behavior of some is absolutely shameful, especially Bellin's. If you will look in the reprinted edition of Photographic Whitewash, you will find CIA records in which they have every possible explanation for the first shot, but as represented in the Zapruder film, they didn't give it to the Warren Commission, and Bellin suppressed it from his own work. That's a minor criticism of the man who I regard as a Judenrat. Schweikers were conspiracy theory nonsense. I stopped off and spent a morning with him on my way to the hospital when I was in great agony from thrombophlebitis. Even in canes or in crutches, I had trouble walking. And I debunked each of the 4 of those theories he gave me. Made no difference, he still published them. It was so outrageous that even his other member of the committee wouldn't sign the report. He was well intended, don't misunderstand me, but this is the consequence of all of the wonderful efforts that we lose by all of the nonsense that gets a lot of attention.
Okay, I guess we can do the walk around then. Let's detach and add the battery.
Promise us to keep a miles to go before we sleep. I'm a first-generation American. I'm the first member of my family ever born into freedom. This gave me a chance, and Frost's words. And I welcome it. I welcome it. And it was more than worth the cost. And the cost was great for me and my wife both. But it's a blessing to have been able to do it. It's a blessing that an angel remains on my shoulder when I'm 80 with all the illnesses I have and enables me to continue. And although I have several sleep disturbance problems, I sleep every night. I never have trouble falling asleep. I have trouble staying asleep, but never falling asleep. When you're my age, I think this will be more understandable to you. I'm 80 now. And
Was there ever a time when you, when things were so difficult and it was so depressing the way things were going that you had considered just giving up the research that you're doing at times?
First of all, I've never been depressed in it. And second of all, I've never considered that. Mm-hmm. This is much too important an event in the history of our country. Most of the people like Posner who talk about buffs and are themselves amateurs, despite his being a Wall Street lawyer, don't understand anything at all about it. They may not for their own personal reasons, they may not because they have complicating attachments, but this is one of the major events in the history of our country and in some ways in the history of the world. It cannot be consigned to history with a dubious epitaph of these never intended to be honest official investigations. It changed, the assassination of President Kennedy turned the world around. That kind of thing cannot be ignored. Now, I do have a background that qualified me for this work. It's something they can't teach you in college. It's something the professor don't understand to be able to teach you. It's something that you acquire and you can acquire in the course of a long lifetime. I was a reporter, an investigative reporter. I was a Senate editor, a Senate investigator. I was an intelligence analyst in World War II. I did some investigating in intelligence. I was a troubleshooter. I encountered a case in a distant way, in a much minor way, similar to Oswald's, of a frame-up in World War II. General Donovan had me investigate it when I first came into OSS. And in 6 weeks, those men were walking the street. So there are all sorts of things, and I try and impress on the young people I have contact with that although they don't recognize it at the time, life is full of learning experiences from which we can extract a lot. So I have a background these people don't have for this work, and I knew of nobody else who was working in the field with that background. So I never considered giving it up, and I was never depressed. I was disappointed, I was saddened, I was sick at heart, but never depressed. And that's why I haven't stopped. When we started this work, I was broken in debt. The work didn't get me out of debt. It was the confiscation of a property I owned to go into a park. And then, in addition to that, the settlement of a case against the military for ruining my farm with low-flying military helicopters. This work didn't get me out of debt. But at no point, and never at one point did my wife suggest it, at no point did I consider not doing it. When I first went to the archives, I couldn't afford to pay for the copies. And much of it I didn't copy, I made notes on. But I never, ever thought of giving it up. Now, don't misunderstand me. There was a point at which I hadn't planned to continue with it. I'm talking about from the time I changed and planned to continue. I don't know if that's comprehensible or not, David, but...
Oh, sure, I understand. Let's do the... Okay.
Over here is my warehouse as a book publisher. I'm probably the smallest publisher in the country, and commercial publishers gave me the choice of quitting or doing that. And of course, I still bear that Wordsworthian curse. And I think it will probably make more sense if we go around the files the way I'm going and identify them to you as we go down them.
You just follow him and I'll be out of the picture.
These three file cabinets are what may be the most important single record we have. It took a considerable effort and freedom of information litigation to get it. And Gerald Posner, is not unusual in this current book, is deceptive about it. Researchers didn't get it, and the researchers didn't learn about it. It was and they lied about it in court, and finally I got them. This represents 42 linear feet of a special file in the Dallas office of the FBI, of an index that served only one purpose: to let the FBI keep control over what the Warren Commission might have. They had a more complete index of the other records. From here on down is what I call my overflow files, correspondence, things like that I have no room for in my office. And beginning here and extending into a number of boxes, these three file cabinets are on the Freedom of Information lawsuits. And if you want to get an idea of how much work was in them, I must have written the equivalent of 4 or 5 long books and affidavits I filed in the Freedom of Information lawsuits. Along this wall are my files on the King assassination, one of my own work, and all the rest, the records I got mostly from the FBI. I can't remember all the things that are in these boxes up here, but at some point all of them are labeled. When we get down here, these 2 file cabinets are of only my appeals in the Department of Justice in these cases. Look at the volume of it. They were so dishonest. These are just administrative appeals to give you an idea of the enormous amount of time and effort. And again, most people don't understand the indispensability of my wife and that to get these records. Now let's go back here. along here are the files I got from the FBI. They are all identified by the file number. Each one is identified by the section, which is their word for volume, and within each section, the serials, which is their word for page. Except that a serial relates to an entire document rather than one page of it. Some of these documents are 1,000 pages long.
Are these the headquarters files?
These are FBI, beginning here, they are from FBI headquarters. And as we go along here, you'll see the different files on the Kennedy assassination, on Oswald. Oswald continues, and here's a liaison file with the Warren Commission. They never released other files on the Warren Commission. They have them, they lied about them. The Jack Ruby file, they're called, that is classified as a civil rights case. That's what 44 represents. Now, bulkies is an interesting thing that most people don't understand. Is sometimes referred to as enclosures behind files. They are documents that the FBI says are too large to fit in the files, but in fact they are not. They continue, they contain evidence, things of that sort. They continue all the way down here. Here the field office files themselves start, the Dallas field office files. Now this contains the only means other than the Dallas Index, and as part of it, of finding the documents that were not disclosed from the Dallas office files on the ground that they had been previously processed in the headquarters files. That means nothing unless you know where they are in the headquarters files. So it took about 5 or 6 months of efforts, but the FBI finally annotated the work papers to show with each file number what its file number is in the FBI headquarters records. This is a duplicate of Zapruder's camera. And as we come around here, we continue with the field office files, plus a file, because I had space here, for a legal-size file cabinet of criminal division records that I got. And down in here are some files of some excellent work done by Mark Allen and Jim Lassar when I couldn't continue, and there's some duplicates that they gave me years ago. Here are what I call my subject files. And if you don't mind, I'll sit down for a minute and explain this to you, because my leg's beginning to complain. As I went over these records, I sat in the armchair in which you saw me upstairs with my legs up and my arms like this, holding it. On my right, I had paper clips and some little slips of paper, and as I came to a document I wanted copies of, either for my own reasons or because I thought it would be of interest to others, I put the paper, right on the piece of paper what I wanted to do with it, and put it on with a paper clip. And my wife, who does mechanical work much better than I, as she made copies, kept the records in exactly the order in which we received them. Those I call my subject files, and I have them here by name. Down here farther, I have Warren Commission files. This one in the top drawer is of the Commission's executive sessions. I had to file a number of lawsuits to get them, but I finally did, and I published some in facsimile, in whitewash 4, and in postmortem. These other two files are of CIA records.
Have you managed to find any other copies of the files in the military intelligence that were destroyed in other areas?
No. They were more than just military intelligence. You're talking about a unit that was liquidated that was based in Texas. Mm-hmm. It was all of the Army's files. I'm sorry to make that clear before.
So they went around and gathered them all up?
No, they had already been collected, and as I remember it, sent to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania for storage. There were 3 large files, and they were all destroyed. Mm-hmm. I can't give you any comprehensible explanation of it, but I do suggest that when my new book never again appears, there may be a partial explanation of it.
Will that be published by you or by
a friend of mine is taking care of it with a small publisher,
mm-hmm.
and because since all of these illnesses accumulated, I decided the most important thing for me to do is to get on paper what may no longer exist after I'm alive, and I'm not even paying attention. What comes out will be time enough. I don't even know who the co-publisher is going to be. But I do keep working a long day whenever I can, and most days I can. I get tired, but I do it.
It's very impressive archives you've assembled here. It's
Oh, they will all
staggering.
be permanently available to the people under exceptional conditions of access. Hood College, which is a fine institution, and an excellent college with traditional attitudes toward scholarship, will be raising funds to make all of these available to any library in the country, college or otherwise, by some of this new optical gadgetry that I don't understand. A time before last when I was there was a meeting, and the president came up to me. She's a wonderful woman and a very, very able person. She's now the president of Carnegie, chairman of the Carnegie Educational Foundation. And she said, right here where we're standing is where we're going to have all that equipment. And that was in the library. It's a new and beautiful library.
Mhm. That's terrific.
So these records will always be available to all the American people. And that, of course, was my hope.
I guess the majority of it is stuff that was not published in the 26 volumes of the Marine
Overwhelmingly,
Corps,
overwhelmingly.
or the 12 volumes of the House Select Committee either.
Sure.
Mhm.
Blakey never wanted to find out what the truth was. He wanted to promote Blakey and his preconceptions. It may be only an unconfirmed rumor, but I did hear an unconfirmed rumor. He hoped to become Attorney General by it.
I know he had a background in the Justice Department against the mob, and a lot
was-
of people have theorized that he wanted to make the mob the new scapegoat, to hope that the
Well,
American
then,
public would
I
swallow
don't think he viewed them as a scapegoat. I think he believed it.
Mhm.
People get hung up with this. Most people don't realize that, except for my work and Sylvia Mars, and she's dead, and Howard Rothman, who's no longer in it, it's all conspiracy theorizing. Either you conspire you theorize there was a conspiracy, or on the official line you theorize there wasn't.
Right.
The Warren report is only a theory, and even the FBI didn't agree with that, and the Secret Service agreed with the FBI.
Yeah, I do see a lot of similarities between your approach and Paul Hoke's, and in his Echoes of Conspiracy, I've got every one that he ever put out, and I put it all together, and I read it like a book. And he seems to be one of the more responsible people in that
Correct.
he does not theorize himself. And I
Well,
found
he has
that
done-
very, very refreshing in terms
He
of
has
the
done a
research.
little bit of what you could call theorizing, but I agree with your description completely. He's done some very, very important work that nobody else did.
Yeah. I did an interview with him recently, and I was very happy to get him, because he lives on the West Coast.
I know.
And I run into him.
How do his children look now? How are they?
I didn't see his children.
Oh, two beautiful girls.
Okay,
and a
well,
fine wife.
I guess they didn't.